Anna's days began to feel like a delicate balancing act, each moment fraught with tension as she struggled to navigate the growing divide between herself and Michael. She thought the kiss would have ended whatever had sparked between her and Ethan, but instead, it lingered like a shadow in the corners of every room. Each interaction carried an unspoken weight, and the guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. Michael, oblivious to the turmoil beneath the surface, continued his usual routine, though even he seemed to sense a change in her. He would glance at her during dinner, his brow furrowed as though trying to solve a puzzle. "You've been quiet lately," he remarked one evening. "Just tired," Anna replied quickly, forcing a smile. She wasn't sure if he believed her. The tension in her chest tightened every time he looked at her with that questioning expression, but she couldn't bring herself to confess. Meanwhile, Ethan's presence became harder to ignore. He wasn't overt, but his actions spoke volumes. He lingered when they passed in the hallway, his hand brushing hers in ways that felt too deliberate. He offered to help with small tasks around the house, staying close enough that she could feel the heat of him. One afternoon, as Anna folded laundry in the living room, Ethan joined her, sitting on the edge of the couch. He picked up one of Michael's shirts and started folding it. She glanced at him, surprised. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a grin. "I know how to fold a shirt." She couldn't help but laugh, but the moment felt too intimate, too familiar. "You don't have to help," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "I want to," he replied, his tone earnest. The way he looked at her made her heart ache. She hated how much she wanted to believe him, how much she longed for the attention he gave so freely. The secret moments between them grew, each one pulling her further into a web she couldn't untangle. She told herself she could stop it at any time, that she had control. But the truth was she didn't want to stop. Ethan made her feel seen, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Michael began to notice the cracks in her facade. He'd come home and find her distracted, lost in thought. "Everything okay?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. "Yes," she replied, her back turned to him. "Just tired, that's all." But he wasn't convinced. She could feel his eyes on her, searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. Ethan, too, grew restless. He started asking questions, subtle but pointed. "Are you happy?" he asked one evening, his voice low enough that Michael, sitting in the next room, wouldn't hear. Anna didn't know how to answer. The truth was too complicated, too painful to admit. Instead, she deflected, changing the subject. But the question hung in the air long after the conversation had ended. The tension came to a head one night when Michael caught them in a moment that was too close, too revealing. They weren't touching, but the space between them carried an intimacy that was impossible to ignore. Michael's voice cut through the silence. "What's going on here?" Anna froze, her mind racing for an explanation that wouldn't crumble under scrutiny. Ethan, for once, was silent, his usual charm nowhere to be found. The fragile balance she had been desperately trying to maintain shattered in an instant, leaving her to face the consequences of the choices she had made. Michael's question hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Anna's breath caught, her mind scrambling for an answer that wouldn't make things worse. Ethan stood frozen, his usual confidence replaced by a rare silence. The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them, and for the first time, Anna realized there was no escape from what was about to happen. "I asked you a question," Michael said again, his tone low but dangerous. "It's not what you think," Anna stammered, her voice trembling. She hated how weak she sounded, how transparent her words felt even to herself. Michael's gaze shifted between her and Ethan, and she could see the pieces falling into place in his mind. His expression twisted, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and hurt. "So, this is what's been going on?" "No," she said quickly, stepping forward, desperate to stop him from jumping to the inevitable conclusion. "It was nothing, just a misunderstanding." Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Michael, it's not what it seems. Just listen for a second." Michael turned on him, his anger now fully directed at his brother. "You don't get to talk right now," he snapped, his voice rising. "You think you can come into my house," and he stopped, his hands clenched in a fist at his sides, as though even finishing the sentence was too much to bear. Anna tried to interject, but her voice faltered. She could feel the chasm between them widening, the unspoken truths piling up until they threatened to bury her. "Michael, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" he shot back, his voice breaking. "That you've been lying to me? That the two of you—" He stopped himself again, shaking his head as if the words were too bitter to say aloud. Ethan stepped forward, his expression earnest. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear, Michael. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Michael barked out a bitter laugh. "You think that makes it better?" The tension in the room was suffocating. Anna felt as though she was watching everything unravel in slow motion, powerless to stop it. The guilt that had been simmering beneath the surface now consumed her, leaving her raw and exposed. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Michael stared at her, his jaw tight. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" he repeated, his voice full of disbelief. "You had a choice, Anna. Both of you did." The silence that followed was deafening. Anna could see the betrayal etched across his face, the pain she had caused cutting deeper than she had ever imagined. She wanted to reach out, to try and fix the damage, but she knew it was too late. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, breaking the silence. "I'll leave," he said quietly. "I'll pack my things tonight." Michael didn't respond, his focus entirely on Anna. "Is this what you want?" he asked, his voice softer now, but no less devastating. Anna shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Michael. I want you. I want us." He let out a heavy sigh, the weight of her words seeming to crush him further. "I don't know if that's possible anymore." Ethan left that night without another word, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing through the house. Anna and Michael sat in the silence that followed, the space between them feeling impossibly vast. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost defeated. "I don't know how we come back from this, Anna. I don't even know if I want to try." She didn't have an answer. All she could do was sit there, the reality of what she had done sinking in. The life she had known, the marriage she had clung to, was fractured in ways that might never be repaired. And as the house grew still once more, Anna realized that the emptiness she had tried so hard to escape had only grown, swallowing her whole. Anna sat in the living room, the muted hum of the dishwasher, the only sound breaking the stillness. The house felt hollow, as though it had absorbed the weight of her isolation. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands crawling toward evening. Michael wouldn't be home for hours, as usual. Work had consumed him, leaving her with days that blurred into each other. Her phone buzzed, a text from Michael. "Ethan's staying with us for a while. Just helping him get back on his feet." No other details, no explanation beyond what was necessary. She sighed, unsure what to make of it. Ethan had always been the black sheep, charming but unreliable. It had been years since she'd last seen him, and the thought of him invading her carefully controlled world unsettled her. By the time Ethan arrived, the sun had dipped below the horizon. He stood at the doorway with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his familiar grin lighting up his face. "Hey, Anna. It's been a while." "Ethan," she greeted, trying to mask her surprise. He was more polished than she remembered, his boyish charm tempered by something deeper. "Come in." He stepped inside, filling the space with an energy that made her acutely aware of how empty it usually was. They exchanged pleasantries, though Anna remained guarded. Ethan was polite, grateful even, but his easy confidence reminded her of Michael in the early days of their relationship, before the weight of responsibility had hardened him. Over the next few days, Ethan settled in. He had a knack for making himself at home, effortlessly blending into her routines. Unlike Michael, he noticed the little things. "You always keep fresh flowers here?" he asked one morning, pointing to the vase on the kitchen table. "It brightens up the space," she replied, a little taken aback by the question. "They suit you," he said casually, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. She brushed it off, but the comment stayed with her. Conversations with Ethan flowed easily. He had stories about his travels, his missteps, and his dreams of starting fresh. Anna found herself drawn to his honesty, his ability to laugh at his own failures. It was a stark contrast to Michael's stoic demeanor. She told herself it was harmless, that she was just enjoying the company after months of solitude. But there were moments that felt too intimate, too charged. The way he held her gaze when they talked, how he seemed to know when she needed a laugh or a listening ear. One afternoon, he helped her carry groceries inside, their hands brushing as they reached for the same bag. It was a small, fleeting touch, but it left her pulse racing. She began to dread the hours before Michael came home, knowing the dynamic would shift. Ethan would retreat into the background, and the house would fall silent again. Anna told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things. Yet, deep down, she knew something had changed. Ethan's presence had awakened a part of her she thought was long gone. The days blurred together, yet the atmosphere in the house felt different. Anna found herself gravitating toward Ethan more often than she intended. He was always there, ready with a quick joke or a story to fill the silences that had once felt suffocating. She told herself it was just harmless companionship, nothing more. But the boundaries between them grew increasingly fragile. One evening, they found themselves sitting in the kitchen after dinner. Michael had texted to say he'd be late again. Ethan poured himself a glass of wine and offered her one. She hesitated but eventually accepted. The tension between them felt heavier in the dim light. "Must be hard," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Michael working so much, being alone all the time." Anna glanced at him, startled by the directness of his observation. "It's just how things are. We gotten used to it." He studied her, his expression softening. "You don't have to pretend with me, Anna." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. She looked away, feeling exposed. "It's not pretending. I love Michael. He's dependable." "Dependable doesn't sound like love," Ethan replied, his tone careful, almost apologetic. Anna didn't respond. She felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, forcing her to confront feelings she had buried long ago. The days that followed were filled with moments that felt innocent on the surface but carried an undercurrent of something far more dangerous. Ethan would find excuses to linger in the kitchen while she cooked, offering to chop vegetables or set the table. Their hands brushed more often than seemed accidental. When they talked, his attention felt unwavering, his gaze holding hers in a way that made her stomach flutter. One afternoon, a sudden downpour left them both stranded inside. Michael's absence, as always, loomed over the house like a shadow. Ethan suggested watching a movie to pass the time. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, but the space between them felt charged. Halfway through the film, Ethan made an offhand comment about a scene, and Anna burst into laughter. It was the kind of laugh she hadn't experienced in months, unrestrained, genuine. She caught his eye and saw the warmth there, the way he seemed to be soaking in her joy. Before she could think better of it, she reached out to touch his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, unsure what she was even thanking him for. "For what?" he asked, his voice low. "For being here, for making things feel less lonely." His gaze darkened, the playful glint replaced with something far more serious. He leaned in slightly, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Anna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She knew what was about to happen. Every rational part of her screamed to pull away, to stop it before it went any further. But when his lips brushed against hers, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It lasted only a moment, a fleeting, stolen kiss. But it was enough to shatter the delicate equilibrium they had been clinging to. Anna pulled back, her heart pounding in her chest. "This we can't," she stammered, her voice trembling. Ethan's expression was unreadable, a mix of regret and longing. "I know," he said simply. But even as they agreed to pretend it never happened, the memory of that kiss lingered in the air between them, impossible to erase.